Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. We're very excited that you're here for what we're hoping to be a very intimate and exciting and inspiring afternoon. As you know, we're gathered here today because the Graça Machel Trust is kicking off a celebration of 10 years in its existence, and really looking forward to the next many, many, many more thereafter. By way of introductions, I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Leila Akaloun. I work with the Graça Machel Trust and have the honor of serving as the advisor to Mrs. Machel. I know there are many, many dignitaries in the room. We've got leadership from civil society, from academia, from the private sector. So I will borrow the South African acknowledgement of all protocols observed. It's Nigerian. Okay, it's Nigerian. Thank you very much. Pan-African. We'll take it all. We'll take it all. Yes, it's African. But as we kick off our 10 years, really we hope this afternoon will help ignite a spark in you to join us on our journey. And you may ask, what journey is this? I get the question all the time, who is Graça Machel and what is it that your trust does and what impact are you having and where exactly and what field? And so we hope this afternoon helps to answer those questions and really garner your spirit to help us with the impact that we're having on the continent. We're an organization that is a movement-building organization dedicated to advancing women and children on the continent. And so to help sort of unpack the work that we do, this afternoon we've got an exciting lineup of conversations. We've got a fireside chat with our illustrious board members, some of our veteran board members, a presentation by our CEO to share the strategic vision of the organization, and then, of course, a rousing set of remarks by Graça Machel, our founder, here. And then we'll welcome to open up the session to questions and answers and really help with the engagement process as partners here. So without further ado, I want to give a little bit of context to this question that we're all asking. What is the journey? What is the Graça Machel Trust about? And it's a question that I came to the Trust with about 2 years or so ago and was answered in a beautiful way, I find, in Tanzania. It was my second trip with Mrs. Machel, and we ventured to a very rural part of Tanzania to visit an education project of the Graça Machel Trust called the Mara Out of School program, where we're bringing thousands and thousands and thousands of children who were formerly out of school back into the formal education system. So far, we've got about 23,000 children who've entered the system based on the work that is being done. And we journeyed from Dar es Salaam to the Mara region, hours on a flight, hours in a car. We finally get there and we're welcomed by about 1,000 children, very, very, very eager to see Mrs. Machel. And so as she greeted the children, she was telling them of the importance of staying in school and following their dreams and eating a balanced meal, and really was inspiring them, as you'll see there in the photo there, to keep along their path of education. And from there, the next stop was to one of the classrooms where we met with teachers, we met with parents, we met with government officials, with local village leaders. And she became a walking billboard for advocacy around education and health. So she was obviously sharing the importance of ending the damaging traditional practices of female genital mutilation and ending child marriage. She was discussing the importance of nutrition, crop diversification, ensuring that children were transitioning from primary to secondary school. And from there, we happened upon an orphanage where girls, as you'll see here, aged from about 6 years old to 16, had the courage to run away from child marriage in and of themselves. And so they were in an orphanage and continuing along with their education. So after giving another sort of encouraging speech to the young ones, one of the littlest girls stood there, and as everyone else crowded around Mrs. Machel to take photos and they wanted a hug, she sat there and she was shaking like this. And I thought, oh my goodness, is this some sort of epileptic shock? Is she okay? What's going on? And I said, baby girl, are you okay? What's the matter? And she said to me, this superwoman told me that I can be anything I want to be. My goal is to be a little bird, and I want to fly and take my sisters with me. She said she wants to fly and she wants to take her sisters with her. And that, in a nutshell, is what the work of the Graça Machel Trust is all about. It's advocating for children and women. It's supporting and nurturing them to be able to fly. And so with that, I will kick off our proceedings. We've got a video here to demonstrate some of the work, and then from there, as you'll see from your programs on the tables, we'll flow into the rest of the afternoon. We will now move to hear a few insights from our board members, Theo Soa and Josina Machel, moderated by Donna Katzen. Thank you very much for moderating. Donna is an founding executive director of Shared Interest, a social investment fund that mobilizes the financial and human resources of South Africa's lowest income communities of color. So we'll have a few words from them and we'll continue on with our discussions. But please, in the meantime, there's coffee, tea. Feel free again to be as comfortable and relaxed as possible.
Thank you, Leila, and thanks to everyone in this room. So many of you here have helped to make this work possible, and we want to thank you on behalf of the Graça Machel Trust. And for those who are new and just learning about this work, we are inviting you to join us on this profound journey. And thank you for being here to mark this milestone. I'm going to be introducing our two panelists, our two fireside chatters, as it were, who are founding members of the Graça Machel Trust Board of Trustees and tremendous leaders in the field in their own rights. So you will be hearing first, from both of you, but on my right and my left is Josina Machel, who is not only the daughter of Graça Machel and Samora Machel, but also the sort of adopted daughter of Nelson Mandela and part of tremendous legacies of struggle and working for civil society. She was born into that legacy of activism and has carried it on throughout her life to advance her life's calling, which is women's rights. So as the founder of the Kuluka movement, she is helping to activate social change in communities across Africa and serves on a number of international boards that include those of the Graça Machel Trust, the ABC Atlas Mara in Mozambique, the Emerald Group, the Cecilia Institute for Child Development, and of course serves as the director of the Graça Machel, the Samora Machel Documentation Center. So this is Josina. And on Josina's left, we are honored to have with us Theo Soa, another pioneer and leader in this trust and this movement. She is a trustee and on the finance committee of the Graça Machel Trust and CEO of the African Women's Development Fund. She has an extensive experience as an international advisor on a number of international issues and has done pioneering work in advocacy, service delivery, evaluation, facilitation, policy, and you basically name it, working with international organizations on a broad range of international issues. She has also helped to advise organizations including UNICEF, Stephen Lewis Foundation, the African Union, DFID, and UNDP, amongst others. So we are in very privileged space and time. And I wanted to ask Josina and Theo if they would start out by reflecting backward at this moment on the moment of birth, the early days of the trust. What brought you to this work and why?
Thank you. Good morning. And thank you for, good afternoon, sorry. And thank you for joining us. Well, as a founding member of the Graça Machel Trust, this is indeed a very big moment in our journey, having to reflect back on where we've come from and where we're going, where we are and where we're going. We started this, and actually it was with Theo and with Mom, a few years ago, and we thought about an organization that would encapsulate the work of Mrs. Machel throughout the years. As we know, she's a champion of women's rights and children's rights. She has extensive work. She's done extensive work in these two areas. And we thought, after she had created the Foundation for Community Development in Mozambique, and she had then started doing work in Africa and the rest of the world, we needed to have something that we could actually have pinpointed and say, this is the impact. We can measure the impact and we can plan better. So that was the reason we were founder members, or chosen to be founder members of the organization. Now, let me just speak a bit. I'm not very modest. I believe that. No, I'm not very modest. I believe this trust is a unique institution in our continent, because we are one of the very few, if perhaps not one of the only ones, that are working in 21 countries. We've got diverse programs and programs and interventions. Of course, on children's rights, as we said, we looking at nutrition, but more than that, what we actually do is is actually influence the way people look at children and the way people treat children, but looking at specific periods. For example, early child development, so it's the first 1,000 days, and then from then onwards, looking at nutrition, so that the potential of these children is actually augmented, let's say, from the very beginning. We look also at women's issues, and we've got different programs on women in business, women in agriculture. We've been pioneering in setting the agenda when it comes to women and financial inclusion. A few years ago, I remember when we first went for, was it Davos in Cape Town? It was Davos, it was, which one? It was WEF. There were very few women actually discussing the issue of financial inclusion, setting the agenda, looking across the table at ministers of finance, at directors, governors of the Reserve Bank, and actually putting the issue, setting the agenda, and explaining the impact. It's not just about having women working there, but it's actually women dictating how all the services need to be implemented to serve actually women.
Okay, so nothing left to say. No, I'm joking. Those of you who know me know that I always have something to say. I actually just wanted to go back a little bit, and on the film, those of you who know her know Sizonke Misamang, who was there, and she said, legacy isn't the past, it's about how we look to the future. And when we very first thought of setting up the GMT, it really was about that. I feel really blessed. I met Mama Machel when I was a lot younger than this, and working in South Africa, and then was able to join her on the Children in Armed Conflict study that she was putting together. That study changed the way the world looked at children in conflict. It changed the way the UN worked. It changed the way bilaterals funded. It changed the way governments protected children. And for me, that's just an indication of the work that she's done in raising issues before they become issues, and then not just talking about it, but making change happen. So when we actually first started talking about the Graça Machel Trust, to be honest with you, she didn't encourage us, shall I put it that way? But Sizonke and Zina and a few others of us were saying, we live in a world where African women are not celebrated. Our achievements are forgotten. Other people co-opt those achievements. And then what do our girls look toward? They look towards people who are external, when actually it is African women who have driven change for generations. So we pushed her. We pushed her to say, she has mentored us. She has helped develop us. She has been more than a mother and an inspiration to us. And so that little girl who said, I want to fly and I want to take my sisters with me, the fact that Mama Machel herself has flown, and people quite often know her and will say things like, She is the wife of Nelson Mandela. She is the wife of Samora Machel, both of which are very important things. But for those of us who know her, her importance is that she was a liberation fighter, that she was a first minister of education, that she made sure that marginalized children in Mozambique were brought into the education system, that she was a mentor and an inspiration to liberation fighters in Zimbabwe, in Tanzania, that she worked across the continent to make sure that our visions of justice could actually happen. And that is what the Graça Machel Trust tries to do. It isn't actually about her legacy in terms of her past, though I do think we need to document that. It's actually about how we look to the future. And so that is what we are hoping that all of you will join us on. Many of you have been here since the beginning. I'm looking at Bassi. But there's so many of you who have been part of this journey. But I think it's more important than ever now that we take this forward. We live in a very fragmented world. And in that fragmentation, some of the gains that we've made as women, as child rights activists, as Africans, as global activists for equity, have become fragmented at best. We need now to really hold these things together. And one of the things that I love best about the Graça Machel Trust is that it believes in collective action. So when we're talking about women's economic advancement, we're not talking about a small handful of women who increase their income. We're talking about African women working together in networks, whether it's the African Business Women in Business Network, whether it's the agro-business networks, whether it's the New Faces, New Voices, which is the financial inclusion network. It's all about acting collectively to transform systems for all African women, for all women, because some of the policy changes have affected global financial inclusion issues, and actually for all communities. It's about an idea of justice and how we actually reach that justice.
So just to make this concrete so that people can actually see what these beautiful and prophetic principles look like in action. I mean, I know one of the things that has moved me has been the opportunity to work with the Trust on the African Women in Agribusiness project, which is benefiting more than 1,000 smallholder farmers and helping to access African commercial finance. I'm wondering if each of you could pick one project or one initiative, which is, I know, a challenge right now, but to think that to help people actually picture what this work and what this change means in people's lives.
I have to choose one. I was kind of prepared to talk about two. No, it's fine. No, I'll do one. Something that for me is really remarkable in the way the Graça Machel Trust works is illustrated through the MARA program. It is about, of course, ending child marriage, and ensuring that children actually transition from primary education to secondary education, and in that sense, they can live their best potential. But, you know, it was starting with that ideal to say we need to retain girls at school. But then the way we worked and we got there, we realized that in order to ensure that, it's not just about the educational system, it's actually the social system behind it. And so it was necessary for us to start engaging with the parents. It was necessary to start engaging with the leaders in that community and actually creating an understanding of why these girls need to continue with their education. Now, we know that, you know, in certain contexts, it's culturally challenging to have that conversation, because young girls have to stop going to school at a certain point because they need to get married. That means that the family has some gain over that, right? It was necessary to actually sit down and say, okay, we are going to ensure that your child continues going to work, but we replace that with something. It's not just an organic process, and it's not something that we came up with in terms of solution, but we found the solution in the context. And that is the important, that is what really marvels me around this kind of work, is ensuring that in every single in every single place that we go, we talk to the people, we talk to the women, to the communities, and then the solutions that are brought about have actually been reached conjointly. That fascinates me, because it then means that we're really looking at social change. We start looking at transformation, and it has impact beyond the next year. So it has impact in terms of future generations. So I'll hold on to that.
Theo,
Okay,
your turn.
so I'll do two very quick ones. So the first one for me is the Fellows program, because on it started out that on Mama Michelle's 60th birthday, she said, "Don't give me presents. I want to find 60 scholarships for 60 African women, because if it wasn't for education, I wouldn't be where I am now." And that 60 started and has blossomed and has gone way beyond that. And it's not just about women getting tertiary and postgraduate qualifications in areas that women traditionally have been marginalized in. It's the fact that those women have been mentored and themselves are mentoring people in their nations, mentoring other girls, other women, and taking it forward. So for me, the scholarship program is a really important one. The second example I think that I would want to bring up is some of the work that's being done in the New Voices, New Faces, New Voices sector. And that's because it illustrates one of the things that the Trust does. The Trust looks for solutions to problems that have been identified but almost ignored. So when the Trust started working on financial inclusion, it was something that very few people were talking about. But the work of the Trust meant that you had networks of women, because it couldn't be individual women who pushed for that kind of change. You needed the networks to actually have the strength to make governments look differently at what legislation should look like, to work with the national banks in a number of SADC countries, to work with policymakers in not just SADC, but at the AU and at places like the African Development Bank. And the result has been a real raising of the profile of the issue. It has been specific policies that have been put in place by various governments and various financial institutions. It has been a re-looking at the role of women in finance by a lot of banks on our continent. And it's actually been a shaping of language and approaches for global organizations looking at financial inclusion. And that ability to move from a problem that is marginalized to a solution that, as Zena said, is contextualized and is in our African context, and then move that solution through government, through civil society, through other social movements, that is so powerful and so promising. And the Trust hasn't got it perfect, but it's doing well.
So just as one quick last question, because we are still waiting for the culminating event, would each of you think about the question of if in fact legacy is about how we look to the future, as has been said and embodies the work of the Trust, give an example or two of the way in which Graça Machel Trust's work is so necessary in Africa and perhaps in the world at this time.
Yes, I do agree with the statement that legacies is about looking at the future, but we cannot just look at the future without being able to reflect on where we come from and who we are, because they are very valid questions. They are very valid lessons in that. The work of the Graça Machel Trust, which we are able to, absorb and learn every day from our founder, from Mom, is unique in the sense that we try to do a few things that only she can do. Only she is able. Mom, it's true. I'm sorry, Mrs. Machel, it's true. They are. No, the thing is, as Theo was saying, there are certain issues that she has managed to put on the agenda that before were not discussed. One of the things I wanted actually just quickly to mention is how the governments in Southern Africa are looking at the issue of stunting. It's just completely different. And the Graça Machel Trust has been able to sit with ministers of health, and actually explain the importance of putting these kind of issues in the budget, to designing plans that actually in the short and in the long term have impact on actual children. We're not just talking about, numbers, but it's actual children that we have been impacting. And so that is quite unique. And I have to say there are moments when we are in situations where we are talking, we are explaining the need and the necessity for these things, but she comes and she explains in such a humane way that everybody does understand. Being it women, about impact of women, for example, in conflict, being the situation of women in the informal sector, she's very easily, she explains, look, this is a significant number of people in a country that are completely ignored. We're talking about GDP of countries, but if these women are not part, of the process, then we're not talking about real GDP. She still has, she does have the amazing capacity of sitting with, decision makers and influencers in the world and say, you are focusing on the wrong issues. Or if you are focusing on the right issues, perhaps you need to look at a different approach to make sure that women count, to make sure that children count, to make sure that young people count in the decision making, and of course they can make a future for themselves. And I think that is a lesson that I personally take, and I hope that the trust, or I believe the trust will be able to also absorb and be able to multiply that in the next years.
Thank you. Thank you. Theo, the last word.
Okay, so two very quick things. One is, I think I mentioned it before, there's the world that we live in and the danger of fragmentation and the importance of working together to actually make sure that we not just hold a line, but that we achieve more than we want to achieve. And I think that the work of the Trust is really important to that. And it's important in a number of ways. One is in the intergenerational activity that's going on, and that the Trust has been really good at developing, whether it's through the scholars, through the networks, etc., but also through some of the personal inspiration, which has meant that people have moved forward. And I always say that I'm very grateful to Mama Machel, because I'm one of these people who like to be behind the scenes and move behind the scenes and not speak, until she took me aside one day and gave me a bit of a lecture, and I learned. And I think there have been many of us where she has said to us, our voices as African women are powerful. We have no right to hold them back. And the Trust is being very good at promoting those voices of African women. I think the other thing is just the reminder to the whole world of the innovation of African women. And one of the things that the Trust is actually piloting and beginning to look at in a very big way now is a gender lens investment vehicle for, by, with African women. It's really exciting, really innovative. The groundbreaking nature of many of the things that the Trust comes up with, I think, is really, really important at this time. And one of the things that I think the Trust needs to think really carefully about is how we document and how we make sure that some of these stories, some of these achievements, some of these changes are going out to the world, because that is the way that we encourage all of you to walk with us as we try and walk with African women.
Thank you so much. Join me, please, in thanking Josina and Theo for this wonderful chat.
Thank you. Thank you once again, Josina and Theo and Dana, for sharing and adding color and texture to the work that the Trust does and the work that Mrs. Machel spearheads. I'd like to draw everyone's attention to your goodie bags. As you'll see inside them, everyone would have received an engagement card. So as you're hearing more about the work of the Trust and understanding sort of the various efforts that we are spearheading, please do take a moment through the course of the afternoon to express interest in what may be different forms of partnership with us as we go forward. So just to keep in mind, that's in your goodie bags. Without further ado, I would like to introduce Dr. Shungu Gorinda. Shungu is our CEO as well as our Director of Programs at the Trust. She comes with nearly 20 years of experience in the health and education sector, a daughter of Zimbabwe, who has joined us, and we're very pleased to have her on board. She'll be sharing a little bit more about the strategic direction of the work that we're doing to give some nuts and bolts to the presentations previously given. So, Shungu, if you wouldn't mind.
All right, thank you, Leila. So I was standing there and thinking to myself that the background noise we're hearing out there, in a way, mirrors where we are as an institution, as the Trust. And what I mean is that we are at a phase where we've really been thinking about, the rich work that the Trust has done over the last 10 years, the breadth and depth of the networks and partnerships and programs, and reflecting and thinking of, the future, where do we go and what do we really focus on? So the key principles for our strategic plan currently and going forward is a very targeted, exciting, highly energized phase where we're looking at consolidating, deepening the work of the Trust, but in preparation for accelerating and scale up. And where this energy comes from, I remember the first day I joined the Trust last year in June. Very excited. I just turned 40. I'm going to join this Trust that's been founded by a woman who I learned about in primary school, as Graça Machel, a liberation fighter, a minister of education, and so forth. And part of my career journey was also started in teaching. So there was a dialogue going on with one of our partner organizations, the Mandela Institute for Development, and there were participants sitting in the room. And, I was going through my orientation, so a group of us were called in to join the dialogue. So we are waltzing our way in, literally, into the space. And there is Mrs. Machel. She says, "Girls, why are you moving like old people?" And I said to myself, right, I need to switch gears very fast in terms of the pace of what the Trust does, the pace of how the Trust operates, and really realizing that the amazing energy of the institution itself and where it draws from the life of our founder. But the impatience that she has, that I found is really fundamental, because when children ask us and say, what are we doing about their future? That impatience is really critical in terms of how we are now looking as the Trust at ways in which we accelerate key issues around education, key issues around social norms that affect children, key issues around structural barriers that also affect women's advancements in many facets. So just thought to share there in terms of, okay, and for a second, I did think, okay, am I in the right place? Can I live up to this? Not sure yet. It's still the jury's still out on that, but very glad to be here to share with you. And I know I'm standing between listening to and the conversation with Mrs. Machel, but we'll really just skim through snippets of our strategic plan. So the core of our plan going forward, building on the networks that we've established over the years, is really building movements for social and economic transformation. As the Trust as an institution, we may look small, but our tentacles and our reach is really very vast in terms of the number of countries, in terms of the individuals, in terms of the institutions that we work with, building on the model that we use. And protect, but also promote the rights of women and children. Our mission remains to amplify women's movements, influence governance, and promote women's contributions and leadership as well in various sectors, but also advocate for the rights of children and their dignity. Our mandate remains very much a Pan-African agenda, and really tackling the fundamentals in relation to removing structural barriers that affect the advancement of women's rights and children's rights as well. So not only do we build women's networks, but we also form and advance program alliances in the various programmatic areas that we focus on. And one of these key issues around fundamental transformation, as Theo shared, that it goes beyond supporting individual women networks and groups, but really to look at the institutions that inform how our countries, how the continent, how the globe tackles women and children's issues as well. And our outcome agenda is very broadly one, ensuring that children fulfill their innate potential. How do we create those environments and provide those resources that ensure that that little girl in Mara, if she wants to fly in whatever direction, she knows and believes that she can do that. And one of the things that I always love to do, you know, every now and again in reflecting on the Trust, is really looking at our logo and that bird that soars, that flies, and that's really what we're about when it comes to children. That potential that exists and how we build that and support that. But also advancing women as active participants. Switch. All right. Okay, thank you. As active participants in society, but with a focus on economic advancement specifically. And our broad context, which has and continues to anchor the work that we do, the framework that continues to guide in terms of how we engage with institutions and partners, is at a global level our Sustainable Development Goals. And that impatience and that acceleration is that we are conscious, though it's 2030, it's really quite near in terms of the commitments, in terms of the targets that need to be reached at a global level when it comes to the Sustainable Development Goals. Yes, our African Union Agenda 2063 has a 50-year life cycle. The timeline is 2063, but I heard that. But really, it's also about how do we accelerate? Because there's no way we, right, can also be saying, I'm going to wait until 2063 to realize X, Y, and Z results. It's also about the now and how we push to advance this agenda forward. There has been progress, but we know that on the continent, 27% of our children do not complete primary school. But also that out of 75% of girls who start school, those who successfully complete school is a fraction of that. And really the implications around early marriage, around also early pregnancy, and the implications are very worrying. In terms of women and the economy, we also know that about 70% of women on the continent are in what we call the informal sector or economy. And so what does that mean, as Josina pointed out, in terms of when GDPs are assessed and statistics are shared, and those GDPs are used to inform where investments go or how policy is prioritized, there is that 70% that is actually not counted in that, and what are the also long-term implications related to that. Our current geographic footprint We are present in 16 countries in terms of the reach of our networks. Home country is South Africa, and our Vision 10-year agenda is really to continue to advance, build networks across all country chapters and regions in the continent in terms of the movement building and creating that collective action across the continent. Snippets of some of the highlights or successes that have been shared, and one for me that really stands out quite significantly is the work that our Women in Media Network has been doing. So we have a network currently of 39 journalists across the continent, and who are really driving the agenda of changing the narrative of how African women, children, but the continent itself is portrayed. Yes, there are many gaps and problems that the continent faces, but there is a lot in terms of progress, innovation, human capital successes that are really not going out there, that network is beginning to work quite significantly on amplifying. But also in terms of how our networks reach at the community level, where in Uganda, that one network in terms of financial literacy worked with the community to train up to 252,000 community members on financial literacy, but went beyond that in terms of engaging financial institutions to set up banks, branches and financial services in a very remote community where people had to travel long distances to access your most basic of financial services, but ensuring that with those services now being made available in the community, members themselves had the information education necessary for them to interface and actually access those services. So moving forward in terms of our consolidating and deepening and setting up for acceleration to 2030, our winning aspiration is that women and children are at the center of Africa's development. We know that many of our policy frameworks and documents really do acknowledge this and put this on the agenda. But for us, it's now about moving from that agenda setting to the action that we really want to see and contribute to on the ground. But also more specifically in the holistic development of children. That a child is not only the nutritional aspects that are important, it's the nurturing, it's the health, and how do we really engage as partners to look at the holistic approaches and investing holistically in children's support and building those movements to channel transformation. Our geographies, in line with our consolidation focus, will continue to focus on the 16 countries that we are present, but really build regional champion clusters, drawing from the work that our various country chapters have advanced over the last 10 years. The Southern Africa bloc has really done a lot of work on agriculture and women in agriculture, and so that is going to be the champion cluster that's going to prioritize that. East Africa, entrepreneurship and building on the investment fund that we are incubating as the trust, and West Africa focusing on inter-Africa trade. In terms of our approach to win, will continue to be a bottom-up approach, where we build and amplify from the lessons, action, and voices of women and networks on the ground, to catalyze action, to really drive advocacy at a national level, towards building our regional collective, and strengthening those global partnerships that also support us to advance that agenda. Our methods of how we will do this, continuing with our network building, strengthening in terms of our advocacy as an institution, and also catalyzing through local actions to demonstrate what is possible. Often in our policy-related engagements, questions come up about, yes, if the money is there, yes, it's a priority, but how? And so through those networks, through those partnerships, part of our agenda is going to be looking at addressing those how questions, so that when we sit at those tables, we are able to say, and this is how you can do it. And there are many examples from our networks, from our partners, that really demonstrate impact on the ground and effective methods of driving change. Another key component will be looking at strengthening our institutional infrastructure or architecture as the trust itself. We are a growing organization. We're kicking off our celebration of 10 years. And I'm always still amazed at when I look at the work that the trust has done and the size of the organization itself over the years. And as we build towards the future, this is a critical priority that we look at really, really bolstering our operational support framework, our resource sustainability, but also that strategic information. And I was taking notes from my board members to say, okay, yes, we have to document in order to demonstrate that this is the work that the trust has done, but how do we share and disseminate that strategic information for other partners network to utilize as well in the spaces that they work. And this diagram or tree really represents what we are driving towards going forward and deepening. At a root level, our national country chapters in our networks that really, really anchor the work that we do, and that is going to be the focus of our investment going forward. At a sub-regional level, really building that connective or collective action of the national networks to build a stronger voice and engaging with the regional institutions as well. And a continental level, building on those regional collectives to also really begin to strengthen and deepen and engage on what we feel are the key focus or priority areas, and also drawing on our global partnerships to advance the work that we do collectively. And in relation to children, we have 4 broad aspects that we will hone in terms of our attention. Previously, our work really focused on education, ending child marriage, and nutrition and health. And a new aspect that we are really going to be anchoring going forward is around early childhood development and investing from the start. I was talking to a financial person about, personal finances. As you advance, you start to think differently. It's no longer about, yes, those nice red shoes you saw. It's about, okay, what can I do to start saving and so forth. And the key aspects, so they calculated a whole lot of scenarios to say, okay, so if you start saving at 20, for your retirement or whatever, and modeling, this is what you can get. If you start at 30, if you start at 40, and so on and so forth. And obviously, the later you start, the returns diminish. And so for us, that's really the principle. To say early childhood development is starting from the very beginning in terms of investments in nutrition for children, investments ensuring that they have nurturing support and environment and services, have access to full health care is critical. So our work is really going to be looking at engaging governments at various levels, from national to global, to look at where are investments really prioritizing over the next cycle. And what does that mean in terms of our children? Statistics tell us that one of the key advantages that Africa has currently is its young population. And it's human capital in that sense. And so if that is the key, what does it mean in terms of where the bulk of the investments and attention is going? And so for us, this is where early childhood development is really critical and pivotal for our attention. And the other areas also looking at how from that early childhood phase do we strengthen the building blocks for those children in terms of access to quality basic education, comprehensive health care, as well as child protection. But at the adolescent phase, there's a lot of work and attention that we know globally now focuses on sexual reproductive health and rights for adolescent girls and young women. So our key priority is really looking at how do we support interventions that enable or promote building the sense of self and agency amongst young girls. And accessing services and education, but keeping girls in school and ensuring that as young women, we are readying them for success by completing at least their secondary education successfully. And those are some of the strategic interventions that we will continue to build on in this space. in relation to building our women's movement. So currently we have 5 networks. The Graça Machel Scholars Network, our network of African business women, Women in Finance Network, our African Women in Agriculture Business Network, and Women in Media Network. So our focus will be really strengthening these 5 existing networks as institutions themselves that we seek to graduate in terms of their support from the trust to further build networks in the areas that they work. And to incubate 2 new networks, one focused on women in technology as a key aspect. And we know that the discourse around the 4th industrial revolution is really now becoming front and center, but what does that mean for women's economic advancement, and also them being part of the decision-making and crafting this agenda going forward, as well as a network of women in energy, extractives, and infrastructure. And 3 key focus areas in our network building that are cross-cutting will be leadership and representation across all the sectors, entrepreneurship development across all sectors as well, and financial inclusion as critical. And some of the initiatives we will continue to then build on that the trust has implemented over the last 10 years that we will document, model, and deepen in the areas that we work, but also disseminate through partners that can scale these interventions going forward. The gender lens investment perspective. So the trust is incubating investment fund, as Theo shared. And we are at a phase where we are really beginning to build and seek partners to support us to set up this fund. And it really looks at raising gender lens investment as a priority for women. We will initially target to look at women-owned, women-led businesses whose work also has impact in terms of advancing women and girls' development on the continent. It will initially focus on East Africa in terms of leveraging and pivoting, you know, the innovations, the drive in terms of economic growth within that region, but that we will seek to advance beyond this current strategy cycle to link through other networks and other regions as we advance. And the last component, in terms of our institutional strengthening, we will prioritize investing in our human capital as the trust itself, talent management, our leadership capabilities, but also our technical capabilities internally, and drawing and building on partners going forward, our operational capabilities, as well as impact and resource sustainability. And this really frames the next 3 years of a short, targeted, and I'm sure will be very highly energized phase of the trust to pivot and accelerate for the next 10 years that we envisage as focusing on our geographic expansion beyond the current areas that we cover, really formalizing and building a continental movement, drawing from the national networks that we have, investing in building our resource sustainability as well as the institution itself. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shungu, for that wonderful recap and forward-thinking movement around where we're going as a trust. And I know I'm the only thing standing between you and hearing from Mrs. Machel. Okay.
So instead of me talking, please ask questions and let's have interaction instead of bombarding people with
information. Okay, we'll do a little switch to the program. We'll have questions and answers now, and then hear from Mrs. Machel, perhaps as a closing. Yeah, Shungu, do you want to join us here at the front? So,
Okay, thank you very much. My question is addressed to her. Can you please elaborate more on the policy position of the trust when it comes to fourth industrial revolution, taking into account the influence it has in the upcoming generation?
So, sorry, Natalie, you wanted to? Okay. Oh, a couple of questions. All right.
Should I ask my question? Mama Graça, we are delighted to be here. I'm Dr. Natalia Kanem, the head of the United Nations Sexual and Reproductive Health Group, UNFPA. My question is, how can we help? It is exciting to see Mara, where you made a promise and you've taken it to 23,000 young people who are out of school. It's very distressing. I confess I didn't know myself that the graduation rate of girls from African secondary schools is under 10%. So I'm really interested to know, as you've gathered partners here, what do you want us to prioritize in the next year? Thank you.
Should we take one more question, if there's one more question?
Ms. Michelle, it's wonderful to be with you and with everybody. And as you know, I've been engaged with Women Advancing Africa, and I didn't see it fitting into this, but one thing I learned is that when we went out to solicit money is that if we compare companies with sectors, we can make a lot of progress in getting other support for the trust. So I would like to rekindle that discussion about how we can better bring to the trust other sponsors to expand some of the work being done in the sectors and how those sectors can be joined in more of a movement. So if that's possible, maybe we could discuss that too.
All right. So to the question in relation to the fourth industrial revolution, so we view it as an opportunity in the sense that part of what we seek to drive is better ways of advancing initiatives, businesses that are women-led and women-run. So that in itself can catalyze that further. However, the key aspect is that some change tends to leave those who are marginalized behind. And so our area of attention and focus is to then really look at how, as it unravels, it is informed and the voices of women and the needs of women are represented in that in such a way that it's responsive to really building more opportunities to advance further. You know, when we look at issues such as women in agribusiness, some of the work that we do in relation to that, and how we've been working with smallholder farmers in terms of improving or increasing their production levels, in terms of their access to markets. One of the key aspects that came out in relation to that was how technology-based solutions can better advance the work that they do, can support them in terms of better access to information. Now more than ever, the issue of climate smart technologies becomes front and center in many regions of the continent and globally. That is. So we really view it as an opportunity, but one that is critical. That it reminds me of, when I listen to how the New Faces, New Voices was formed in 2008 against the backdrop of the global financial crisis. And what triggered that was to say, well, as now, the globe was really looking at recovery from that global crisis, there were voices and faces that were missing. And that was predominantly the faces and voices of African women. And hence, the new faces, new voices saying they need to be front and center in terms of this debate because they are hardest hit. So similarly, in terms of looking at the fourth industrial revolution, that it should be one that does not leave others even further behind in terms of fueling inequality that we're already grappling with. Anything to add? No? Yes, then the other question was, oh, that one's for you, Mom, then.
How can you help? It's so nice to see old friends and new friends, and we feel we are still in the same boat. It has not been easy, it has been hard, but we are still there, huh? And that is really very, very, it gives a very good feeling. Let me try to answer to your question, Natalie. Actually, it was through your hand. We went together to Mara, and we started the conversation there. At the beginning, we thought, to bring children who are out of school, to convince people to bring them to school, it would have been something not so complex. As Zina was saying, the lesson was, really you could not get families to bring these kids who are out of school, because these are children who, for many reasons, they are hard to reach. So you had to do the work of family by family, literally family by family. So it took us a lot of time. It took a much more complex process to convince them. But the fact that now we can have 23,000 children in 5 districts, because it's not the whole of the province actually, it's in 5 districts, we're able to bring them in, while it means we have 23 or 20 perhaps families which are behind this process, but also community leaders and religious leaders, traditional leaders, all of them to believe now that this has to change. More than what you can measure as numbers, I think the important thing is the transformation which is happening within these families and these communities. And for us, is the lessons for us to understand better. We can sit here and we say, oh, we have 20 to 200,000 million people, or 100,000 millions. I'm like Jacob Zuma now. You say there are these millions of children who are outside. Okay, but why are they? What is really make these children become so hard to reach? We learned the lessons. We documented this. The different reasons in which children are kept outside. So there are lessons which we'll not be able to tell you in numbers, but which are very important. We believe this is a model we can really share with other, not only in Tanzania, in other countries on the continent, to say, what are the lessons of Mara? And people have to learn to do the process, as painful, as slow as it is. They have to do it family with family until they can bring all children in. This is our contribution, for instance, for the 2030, to say, leave no children behind. No child should be out. It is our contribution. So you are asking, what can you help us to do? First and foremost, I would like you to help us to document. We don't have even the resources to what we have learned to put properly, bringing the faces and the voices of the families, of the children, etc., of teachers, and then to make the case. And this is what civil society organizations many times they fail to do. They do the ground, then they move on, but we don't document. So if we can together document the case of Mara, okay? And then second, I think where we are now is really to build the capacity of schools and the communities to keep the momentum. The schools have to be having better teachers. It means to work with teachers seriously. Many teachers have no clue of the importance of gender, as we are talking about. For them, children are numbers. So it's not a question of whether they stay in school, it's what is it which takes girls to need much more support to remain in school. That is the process which we have to go in now. we are doing in other schools with the children who are already in schools, but because these have been disadvantaged and they are coming to join another group, so the coming together of the two groups is a new process for us. We need to prepare better. I mean, teachers to do this. But we need to prepare better communities to continue the compact. You know about the Mara Alliance, by the way. And Mara is one of the poorest regions in Tanzania, with the poorest results in education. And what we are trying to do is to transform it in a model of how you start from being one of the worst to be the best. It's a long process. And we are not here saying we are going to do it in 5 years. We are going to do it with the time required until it happens. I had the opportunity to meet someone, some of you will know, Jack Ma. He's passionate on rural education in China. So I learned about his process. I said, would you mind really to come and visit Mara and to see how we can work together, etc. I said, oh, yeah, I can consider that, okay? So what am I saying here is that if there are other experiences in other continents where rural education was transformed successfully, yes, we are going to bring to Mara so that we can not only to hear of what they have done, but to transmit the experience to our alliance, to our headmasters, to our community leaders. How do you transform rural to make it, achieve some of the best levels of performance in schools, etc. So how can you help? We'll talk about this. I was just wanted to explain a little bit what this trust is trying to do. Why sometimes we take the hard position and the hard line. The board members here were talking about nutrition. When they say nutrition, perhaps it doesn't sound something for people who live in this part of the world. Listen, in our continent, 43% of our kids at the age of 0 to 5 are stunted. You hear me? Stunted. And if you don't know what stunted means, it means that these children, because of lack of good food and nutrition, their brains have been, how do you call this? Help me. Yeah, they have the brains have shrunk, and they will never be able to develop the full potential of their faculties as productive people. You hear me? 43%? So the trust decided to take up the issue of nutrition, exactly where it is more. It's difficult because people don't see it. Sometimes they believe that this child has not grown. It's just because the child is short. No, the child is stunted, physically didn't grow. But worse even is what we can see in the brain. We can't see. And we had to take pictures and explain to ministers, to presidents, to show them this is what happens to you children. And how do you now begin to change? It's a long process. And we know these things are not going to happen overnight. But these are the kind of things we choose to do because we are a civil society organization. We have the time, we can have the patience, and we can bring evidence then to public sector to multiply or whatever they want to do. So the trust is, even, I don't want to go further about this, but I just wanted to give a glimpse of the complexity, but the deliberate options which we make when we say we want to work on this. It's to develop certain models of transformation which can be replicated, but it can be multiplied. But more importantly, to my little girls who are sitting here, who are UN, is because, you know, we have been good in having these big policies at global level. And we have these very good policies as African countries. We have also good as government at central level. Please take the time to sit at the village, talk to people, transform this policy into something which transforms their life, As we speak, we have a team, this is in Mozambique, which is working in 10 districts to do what? Literally to train the district, administration and the local, to identify how many pregnant women do you have? Of these women, how many of them they are going now to prenatal? But what are they eating? With little things which you say, you have to do 4 visits at least to prenatal. You have to eat this kind of food every day. This is the way you're going to transform nutrition. Nutrition will not change when we talk, in meetings like this. So we try the hard way, really, and this is to be translated now into local languages so that they can listen. And everything, and then you speak to the husband. Your wife has to eat eggs. You don't eat the eggs and you don't give them to your wife. You have to give eggs to children. Yeah. Are you laughing? But this is the transformation which we need to do. And this is exactly what this trust is trying to do. In certain things, the hard way. So I just wanted to say, what can you help? Build the capacity of the trust. If we are strong and we strengthen the networks at the national level, we will come with numbers. So far, when we say 23, these 23 have to be able to complete secondary education, then we'll say we have done it, okay? So we need capacity. Mostly we need capacity, which many times people don't believe in strengthening institutions. One of the weakest situations on the continent is that we don't have strong institutions. And when we say strong institution, it's not only for us at our headquarters. It's institutions at a country level. It's the capacity to bring them as a region to work together, exactly as Theo was saying. We believe in collective action. Individuals, they can do miracles as individuals, but they don't transform alone. They can't transform institutions. They can remove barriers. To remove barriers, it's exactly when we have these networks of women who go and sit in the office of the central bank and they say, we want you to change the regulation because of A, B, C, D. One single woman cannot do that. But a group of networks, yes, they convince the central banks. They convince ministers. And this is what we are trying to do. So that you, my little girls who are still here, come 10, 20 years from now, you are not going to continue to discuss the same thing we have been discussing for the last 30 years. Removing barriers. And barriers will be removed by collective action at national, at sub-regional, at continental, and global. This is the contribution which the trust is trying to make. And it's not that things, don't pay attention to this. Oh, Mama Graça. No. Don't pay attention to that. Pay attention of how many women are in each one of these networks. How many are going to be in the next 2, 3, 5 years. The movement has to increase, to move as waves. This is what the trust is trying to do. So I ended up talking too much because I was just asking to. But it is true that we will come also with a man which is going to be different from us. We don't have a strong presence in West Africa. We need to strengthen that, and we are working on this very seriously. We don't have a very strong presence in North Africa. We will do that. But I promise you, there's one thing I promise you, is that we will meet you. You come from the global, okay? We will meet you coming from the bottom up, and we'll meet somewhere so that your policy is right. But the lessons of practice in implementation are these ones. We will offer that to you. And that is what is going to build your success. And I want you to be successful. That bird, sorry, is for children, it's for women. It's particularly for you women in leadership. You have also to fly, so that children and girls particularly will say, oh, it is possible, actually, to reach those levels and to change globally what we have to be and what we have to become. So, last 2 weeks ago, 3 I was in Abidjan, and there's a young lady who comes and says, "Oh, Mama, hello, hello, how are you?" And I'm fine, I'm fine. He said, "You don't remember me?" I said, "To be honest, I can't remember who you are." And she says, "You know, when I heard you were coming, I decided to come to this meeting because I wanted to tell you something." I said, "What is it?" "You changed my life." I said, "Your life?" "Yes." "What do you mean?" You hear this? She was at WA. That young lady was at WA in Tanzania. And she reproduced, I didn't remember what I said at the closing of the meeting, of this meeting. And something just struck her. And while she was going home, she wrote down and she decided she's going to create an organization. And the organization is called She Soars. Because I said something like that. She soars. And this is what she's doing. And they said, "But what are you doing?" I said, "Mama, I'm going to send you all the information about this, what we are doing, but I just want you to know that from that time, now I have 10,000 members following me in my organization, She Soars." She's from Nigeria. This is what we would like to do, is really to plant the seeds in young women to know they can, there's no limit of what they can achieve. And more importantly, as we are saying, amplifying. It's not about a small group, it's to multiply and amplify. So, no questions more. I think you have.
And Marjorie, the Women Advancing Africa very much still exists and is the formal apex of the continental movement that we are now really seeking to invest in building as, you know, a really set structure, but that builds from our networks to continue the work going forward. So it's still very much in the,
Right.
yeah.
I think somewhere we should show how all these networks that they meet in WA, because I think it gives the sense of this movement
That there is an overall movement. You know, just one little comment I would make is that I would also add in the role that some of the private sector organizations played, because you have some big companies that came into WA who will do more. And we just have to figure out how to keep them motivated. And so we can talk after, but I think there are others that we've talked to that I think will come into this, and that will build capacity. So we should really focus on that. And I'd like to, maybe while you're here, add into some of the meetings, maybe some of those people who were interested so that they can get the energy from your presence. So, you know, hopefully we can do that.
Just to say that the initiative in West Africa, the cross-border trade which we are developing, is supported by her company, OPS. So she's talking from the point of how private sector is moving this agenda forward, and we will talk definitely. Yeah.
All right. Leila, over to you.
You are, because we said 2 o'clock, huh?
Thank you very much. Just a quick round. Any other questions that would like to be posed? Yes, please.
Maybe not so much a question than a comment, and also appreciation and thanking Mama for being the shoulders we've all sought from. And you continue to do this heavy lifting for most of us, and happy first decade, and there'll be many more to come. I think, speaking for me and Natalia, we definitely will work on this documentation of Mara. I think that's as really as a small ask, so I think tick that. We should be able to do that. But in order to strengthen what is happening at a grassroots level as global institutions such as the United Nations, where we have country offices, the purpose of those country offices is actually to work at a grassroots level in partnership with stakeholders in those communities. So we just need to figure out, because sometimes maybe we do too many things at those grassroots level, and we don't put enough energy on those initiatives that can give us big movement and change. While we're trying to be available to too many, so the capacity to say no to some things so that we could be better at a few, because also the resources on both sides could be limited. So I think this is a good conversation to have in those areas where there is capacity building required, which can be done by partnering at country level. It should be possible in those countries where we have presence. But my comment is on the fourth industrial revolution in Africa. And my biggest concern is that with artificial intelligence and everything that is progressing at a very fast pace, Africa is being left behind. And the diminishing of borders and the fact that the countries and people that will not catch up will actually just diminish as countries, because the others will be so far that we will just become irrelevant because we have no connectivity. So it's even a bigger threat than colonialism. That's the other big challenge of the progress that we're seeing in technology. So we really need, at a macro and a continental level, to tighten up the strategy and put in a gender lens, so that we can really address the threats that we are facing while we take advantage of the opportunity. And I think voices of people like Ma'am Graça, who's able to play at a grassroots and at a very top level, is actually irreplaceable in that conversation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you for your questions and the thought around the thoughtful answers as we brainstorm in ways to take our work forward. I'm hearing from a very strong perspective the documentation of best practice, the taking of models, successful models to scale. I'm hearing the trust is in need of financial investment and support to continue its growth, both at an institutional level and a programmatic level as well. I'm hearing as well the private sector chiming in to ensure that we've got strong partnerships there and bringing them as hand-in-hand development partners and policy level organizations as well. That's fantastic. I don't want to take any more of your time. I think we would love to hear Mama Graça close us out. Okay. Would you like to say a couple of words to close us out and send us on our way?
I thought I had.
Just one thing, as I will say, the pledge cards that you do have in each of your goodie bags, if you wouldn't mind filling them out and sharing your insights and thoughts, and Andia, who's there, will be the one to collect them all, and we will collectively, as a team, ensure that there's follow-up timeously.
Well, really, first and foremost is to thank you for coming. This is Saturday, and many of you would have preferred to have a very pleasant weekend, but here you are. And what we would like to suggest is that this is the beginning of our conversation. And the small things you're going to receive, it's really to tell us, are you interested in one of the areas we discussed here, so that we'll know how to follow up with you on the issues? And of course, if it is a financial contribution as well, but it's mostly for us to know, of those who are here, what are your areas of interest? How do we follow up so that we have a conversation which can lead then over to a common action? But to close, I will say the following. There has been a lot of talk about women's empowerment and children first, isn't it? All this is good. But what we need to do together is really how this translates into transformation of millions of children who are becoming first, and not be ignored, because that's what is happening. When children are out of school, it's because they're not children first, okay? When children are being given to child marriage, it's because they're not children first. So the transformation itself, for me, I think it's where we have a hard work to do, all of us. And to accept that the transformation, it doesn't happen really in Ritz Carlton Hotel, where we are. It doesn't happen in my office in Johannesburg. It happens with the hard work with the real people, those you touch, those you convince, those you make them understand that their life is going to be better if they transform the way they live. So I think these 2030 SDGs, I heard the Secretary General complaining that, well, we don't seem to be near to reach, because this commitment for me, commitment to do something. And each one of us here, you can do something in your personal capacity, in your institutional capacity. But we need to change the attitude of talking about issues, but acting to transform things in our daily lives. And it takes time to think, and you decide what I'm going really to be doing differently now, if I am to be part of this movement. So we hope you will join us. But it's not only because we are trying to do things, but we need also ideas. I want to say this. We need ideas to help us to think differently and to act differently. So whatever are the suggestions you have to say, we heard you. All this sounds good, but perhaps you need to twist and to do this in a different way. We would welcome that. And we hope we became, for those who are old friends, thank you for your loyalty. For those who are becoming friends, welcome. And this is a journey together. And we will hold hands together so that every child, every woman, at least in our part of the world, can soar, can fly.